CEO hunted across America for the man who saved her company, unaware he was her quiet, black, single-dad janitor. At 2:13 in the morning, the Etherian emergency grid went dark.
Traffic. Emergency
Not
protocol
slowly,
7.
not with
I can't
warning.
get a signal. The
One
whole system
moment,
is black.
623 hospitals across the country were receiving
Status
live
check,
routing data,
immediately.
blood
All
deliveries,
hospital routes are offline.
medication
We have a
transfers,
national failure.
critical equipment dispatches, and the next. Every signal flatlined simultaneously, as if someone had reached into the chest of the American medical supply chain and
The
simply
shipment is
squeezed.
gone.
Claire Donovan was asleep
It's
in her
completely
downtown
untraceable,
Chicago
Doctor.
apartment when her
We have
phone
a
rang.
problem.
By the time she reached the office at 2:47, her entire technical leadership team was already there, laptops open, faces pale, talking over each other in the way people talk when they understand the size of what they are looking at and have no idea how to stop it. Ransomware, said her
Activate
head
the
of
emergency
cybersecurity,
protocols
a man
immediately.
named Greg Paulson.
I want the command center
sophisticated,
fully staffed
layered.
within the
It did
hour.
not come through the front door. How long do
Initiate
the
the crisis
outlying
protocol
hospitals
immediately.
have? 6
I want the
hours,
team assembled by the
maybe
time I
8 for the
arrive.
larger
Do
regional
not
centers.
issue any statements
the rural
until I
trauma
review them.
units are already
Understood.
calling.
The technical report
Claire
confirms
stood
a
at the
breach.
center of the
Initiate
room
lockdown
and did not
protocol
raise her
immediately.
voice.
Reroute all data
She had
traffic
learned
and
long
secure
ago
the perimeter.
that
I am
volume
en
was the
route.
enemy of
What is
clarity.
the current status
She
of the
assigned
supply chain
teams,
in Sector
set
Gamma?
priorities,
Understood.
authorized emergency
Activate the level
spending
3
without
protocol
committee approval.
immediately.
She moved through the crisis the way her father had taught her, efficiently, without sentiment. By 4 in the morning, her engineers had tried everything they knew. The ransomware
team,
had not
eyes
simply
on me.
locked the
I need
routing
an
network.
immediate update
It
on
had
the
embedded
disconnected
itself
hospital
into the
routes.
foundational
What is the current
architecture
ETA
in a
for
way
network
that
restoration?
suggested
We've
intimate
lost
knowledge of
connection
how
since
that
June.
architecture
Director,
worked.
the failover
It was
protocols
not
aren't
brute
responding.
force.
I want
it was
eyes on every
surgical.
major hub
At
right now. We need to
4:47,
stabilize the
an
network.
email
The eastern
arrived in
hubs are
Claire's
showing
personal
total failure.
inbox from an
We've lost
address that
primary routing
resolved to
control.
nothing. There was
Incident
no
command.
subject
We
line.
need
There was
authorization
no
for manual
greeting.
override
There
now.
was only a patch file and a plain text note. This will hold for 96 hours. The real fix requires opening what was buried. You will need to find who buried it. Greg Paulson looked at the patch for 11 minutes without speaking. This is not a guess, he said. Whoever wrote this knew exactly where the break was before they started typing. This is someone who has been inside this system before, not recently. I mean at the beginning. Run it, Claire said. The network came back online in stages, like a city recovering from a blackout. First the critical arteries, then the secondary routes, then the smaller capillaries that connected rural clinics to the larger distribution centers. By 5:30, all 623 hospitals had signal. Claire stood at the window of her 42nd floor office and watched Chicago come into the gray early light of morning. Somewhere below her, in the building she was standing in, a man named Marcus Webb was pushing a cleaning cart down the hallway, outside the executive suite, moving the way he always moved, quietly, efficiently, as though he had calculated the precise amount of presence required to do his job without being noticed. He had been on shift since 10 the previous evening. He had heard the crisis unfolding through the glass walls of the conference room, the raised voices, the technical vocabulary, the phrase, foundational architecture breach, that he recognized the way a doctor recognizes the name of a disease they once had. When the engineering team finally named the symptom correctly at 3 in the morning, Marcus had set his mop aside, walked down 4 flights of stairs to the basement maintenance level, and sat down at a machine that no one in the building remembered existed. It was an infrastructure diagnostic terminal, installed during the original build-out of the facility 10 years ago and never decommissioned because it was never connected to the main network. It had no user account. It had no audit trail. Marcus had used it before. Only when he heard something through a glass wall that told him the system was drifting toward a failure mode he recognized. He wrote the patch in 38 minutes. He checked it twice. He sent it from an email address he would delete before the sun came up, which traced back to nothing, because he had made certain of that a long time ago. Then he picked up his mop, went back upstairs, and finished his shift. Marcus Webb was 40 years old and had a daughter named Lily, who was 9 and believed, with complete sincerity, that her father was the best person she knew. He was not sure the world would agree, and the gap between those two things was where most of his life now lived. He had not always been a janitor. 10 years ago, he had been the lead systems architect on a project called Beacon, the routing and logistics platform that now formed the operational backbone of Etherian Emergency Grid. He had built it with 3 other engineers over the course of 2 years, and he had been proud of it the way people are proud of things they have made with their hands and their mind together. In the final phase of testing, he had found a flaw. It was a routing logic error that, under high-load conditions, the kind that occurred during mass casualty events, during severe weather, during the exactly wrong combination of simultaneous emergencies, could direct ambulances to the wrong location. Not always, but with enough frequency and enough consequence that Marcus had written a 14-page technical report and refused to sign the safety certification until the flaw was corrected. He was told the flaw was within acceptable parameters. He was told the launch timeline could not be delayed. He was removed from the project 3 weeks before launch. His name was deleted from all project documentation. The Beacon platform went live on schedule. 3 years after that, on a Tuesday evening in November, Marcus's wife Dina was driving home from a school board meeting when a truck ran a red light and hit her car on the driver's side. The ambulance dispatched to the scene was routed to the wrong intersection, an address that shared a street name with the correct one, in a different zip code, 3 miles away because of a load condition error in the Beacon routing system. By the time the second ambulance arrived, Dina had been waiting alone in a wrecked car for 22 minutes. She died 4 hours later. The delay was noted in the incident report. No one connected it to the routing system. The error was quietly patched 6 months later, described in the changelog as a minor address disambiguation improvement. Marcus did not sue. He did not go to the press. He took Lily, who was 2 years old, found a job that kept him employed and invisible, and watched over the system that had killed his wife the way a person watches over something dangerous that is also, for reasons he could not fully explain, his responsibility. He kept a photograph of Dina in the right breast pocket of his work shirt. Claire Donovan was 31 years old and had been chief executive officer of Etherian Emergency Grid for 2 years, following the sudden death of her father, Edward Donovan, who had built the company from a regional logistics startup into the dominant force in emergency medical supply coordination. She was good at her job. She had restructured 3 failing distribution networks, negotiated the federal contract that now covered 40% of the company's revenue, and managed 2 previous crises without losing a single hospital partnership. What she could not entirely silence was the question that arrived in the space between finishing a task and beginning the next one. Would any of this exist without his name on the door? On the morning after the attack, with the patch holding and the network stable, she read the anonymous note again. 96 hours. 4 days. The person who had written this patch had built a deadline into the solution, which meant they wanted her to look. Her deputy, Derek Hale, appeared in her doorway at 8:54, silver-haired, the kind of man who had been Edward Donovan's chief strategist for a decade before becoming Claire's. The code traces back to the original Beacon architecture, he said. Whoever wrote that patch was working from memory. That narrows the field to the original build team. There were 3 architects on record. He laid 3 printed profiles on her desk. One is a professor in Boston. One is a retired project manager in Denver. One is a consultant in Santa Fe. I can have flights arranged within the hour. Claire looked at the clock on her wall. 96 hours. Book them, she said. Downstairs, Marcus signed out at the security desk, submitted to the standard bag check, and walked out through the service entrance into the cold morning air. He did not know that the woman on the 42nd floor had just decided to look for him. He did not know that the man who had pointed her toward Boston, Denver, and Santa Fe had very deliberate reasons for making sure she looked everywhere except Chicago. The flight to Boston took 2 hours and 14 minutes. Claire spent most of it reading the Beacon project files, 340 pages of documentation that troubled her not for what they contained, but for how clean they were. Real projects had arguments in the margins, version conflicts, the accumulated evidence of human beings disagreeing with each other. These files had none of that. Dr. Elliot Marsh had retired from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology 4 years ago. He looked at the patch file Claire had brought without speaking for a long time. I did not write this, he said. I know. I'm here, because you might recognize who did. He tapped the printout. The structural logic here is integrated. Whoever wrote this was thinking about how every part of the system talks to every other part simultaneously. There was a young engineer on the project who thought this way. He was the only one of us who could hold the entire architecture in his head at once. A pause. He argued against the launch, loudly and in writing. He believed there was a routing flaw the Oversight Committee had chosen to classify as acceptable rather than fix. He was right. I knew he was right. I signed the certification anyway. Marsh looked at the table. His name was not in the files the last time I checked them. I have been in this field long enough to know what it means when a name disappears from a project record. Sandra Osei had managed the Beacon project timeline and now ran an urban garden cooperative in Denver. She met Claire at a picnic table behind the main building. 4 architects, she said, before Claire had finished her second question. Not 3, 4. Anyone who tells you different is working from the edited files. Who was the 4th? His first name was Marcus. He was the most technically gifted and the most stubborn, in the way that people are stubborn when they believe they are the only person in the room saying something true. He submitted a formal objection to the safety certification. He refused to sign it. He was removed from the project, and his contributions were credited to the other 3 in the revised documentation. The last I heard, he had left the industry entirely. He was right about the flaw, Claire said. It was not a question. He was right about the flaw, Sandra confirmed. The decision was made that the cost of delaying the launch outweighed the risk. I have been alive long enough to know that when institutions talk about acceptable risk, they are almost never talking about risk to themselves. Claire thought about her father. She did not say this out loud. While Claire was in Denver, Marcus discovered something that made the back of his neck go cold. A routine infrastructure check revealed that the emergency backup communication channels had been disabled not by the ransomware, which lacked the required access tier, but from inside, using a credentialed executive login. He composed a careful description of what he had found and sent it anonymously to Claire's personal inbox. He did not know that Derek Hale had installed a silent monitoring alert on her inbox using senior executive access tools. He did not know that Hale read his message 40 seconds after it arrived and moved it to a deleted folder. He only knew that no one responded and that the backup channels were still dark and that the patch had 31 hours remaining. Claire flew to Santa Fe that evening and the following morning visited the back office of a retired attorney named Franklin Cross, who had served as outside legal counsel for the original Beacon project and had kept physical copies of everything not out of sentimentality, he explained, but out of a professional habit formed during 30 years of watching digital records become selectively unavailable. She found it in the third banker's box, in a folder labeled Certification Review Dissenting Records. It was a 15-page technical objection report, precise and thorough, written by someone who understood not just how the system worked, but how it could fail under the conditions that no one wanted to plan for. At the bottom of the last page was a signature, M. Webb. The name was familiar in the way a name is familiar when you have seen it somewhere and cannot place where. An ambient recognition, living just below the surface. She turned the page. It was the Oversight Committee's response, a single formal page noting that the concerns raised had been reviewed and determined to fall within acceptable operational parameters. The third signature on the committee response was her father's. She read it twice. Then she sat back in the wooden chair and looked at the water stain on the ceiling and did not move for a long time. Edward Donovan had known, not suspected known, in writing, before he authorized the acquisition, that the system his company would build its future on had a flaw its own architect had called non-negotiable. He had reviewed the objection report, signed the committee response, and proceeded with the deal on schedule. And then he had built a company on it. And then he had handed that company to his daughter. Claire thought about what she had said to the board 2 years ago. My father built something real here. My intention is to protect it. She had believed it when she said it. She folded the documents, placed them in her bag, and called Derek Hale. I found a name, she said. M. Webb. Does that mean anything to you? A pause that lasted 1 second longer than it should have. Webb, Hale said. No, nothing immediate. I'll run it through the database. Are you on your way back? Tomorrow morning, she said. She went back to her hotel and did not sleep well. Back in Chicago, Hale had already moved to the next step. For 6 weeks, he had been negotiating with a private infrastructure holding company called Meridian Capital Group, which wanted to acquire Etherion's federal contracts at a price requiring the company's stock value to decrease significantly before the board would authorize a sale. Hale had a personal indemnification clause written into the acquisition agreement that protected him from any criminal liability arising during the transition period. He needed the damage to reach a certain threshold. He had already disabled the backup communication channels. He had already arranged for a small external hard drive loaded with attack tools to be placed in a building employee's locker inserted by a contractor with ties to Meridian, using a temporary credential that Hale would quietly revoke. He had chosen Marcus Webb's locker because a maintenance access log had flagged Webb's terminal activity. He had not known, when he chose Marcus Webb, who Marcus Webb was. That would not have stopped him. Claire landed at O'Hare 40 hours into the 96-hour window. Hale met her in the lobby with coffee and a briefing document and the relaxed authority of a man who had been managing people through difficult moments for 30 years. He confirmed the patch was holding. He confirmed the name Webb had returned nothing from the company database. She went upstairs. She opened the photograph of the signature on her phone. Then she noticed, for the first time in 2 years of walking past it, the laminated employee directory mounted beside the service elevator on the 14th floor. Webb, M. Locker 1403 night shift. She stood very still in the hallway. Then, she kept walking. That same morning, a security officer named Brian Taggart opened locker 1403 on instructions from Hale's office and found, behind a folded spare uniform, a small external hard drive in a black case. He photographed it, bagged it, and noted the locker assignment in his log. Marcus arrived at 10 that evening through the service entrance, badge scanned, bag checked. Lily was at their neighbor Mrs. Carver's apartment for the night. He had kissed her forehead before he left, and she had looked up from her homework with Dina's eyes dark and direct, and completely certain of him, and said, simply, "I know, Dad." He had been on shift 2 hours when Brian Taggart appeared at the end of the hallway with 2 additional security officers. Marcus saw them before they reached him. He set the cleaning cart against the wall, removed his headphones, and stood still. They walked him toward the service elevator. The route passed the east-facing stairwell, which opened onto the main lobby atrium through a floor-to-ceiling glass partition. Lily was sitting in one of the lobby chairs. She had her backpack on her lap and her jacket buttoned to the top. She must have woken at Mrs. Carver's and insisted on coming. Her face, when she saw Marcus through the glass, was the face of a child who has not yet understood what she is looking at and is still waiting for it to become something ordinary. Marcus stopped walking. "Keep moving," one of the officers said. He raised his hand and waved. He held her eyes and kept his face as calm as he knew how to make it, which was very calm, because he had been practicing calm for 10 years. He mouthed the words slowly. "I am okay. Go back to Grammy Carver's. I will be there in the morning." The security officers moved him forward. The glass partition passed behind him. He did not look back. Claire was on the 42nd floor when the hospital network liaison called about St. Agnes Children's Hospital 3 pediatric surgical patients in procedure. O-negative blood reserve critically low. Emergency transfer from Naperville in progress, but the vehicle's transponder was dark, and the driver could not be reached on the fleet comm line. She was still staring at the unmoving truck icon on her dashboard when her assistant told her she needed to come downstairs. The receiving bay held 6 people, Taggart and his officers, a logistics coordinator named Pete Ingram who was on the phone and clearly distressed, Greg Paulson still holding his tablet, and Marcus Webb, standing near the far wall with his hands restrained behind him and his face entirely composed. "The backup routing channel is not responding," Ingram was saying. "I do not know why the backup is not responding." "I know why," Marcus said. His voice was not loud. It cut through the room anyway. The secondary backup channels were disabled from an executive-level access point in the last 48 hours. It was not the ransomware. Someone inside the building did it deliberately. He looked at Ingram. "The truck is on Route 53. If the transponder went dark at the Interstate 55 interchange, the driver took the default alternate and is heading north toward Evanston instead of east toward the city. He needs to exit at Weber Road, go east on Boughton, and pick up the Tri-State South. That will put him at St. Agnes in 22 minutes. Call him on his personal cell, not the Fleet line. The Fleet.com is routing through the compromised channel. Ingram looked at Taggart. Taggart looked at Claire, who had come through the door 40 seconds earlier. Call him, Claire said. The driver was, in fact, on Route 53, approaching the Interstate 55 interchange. He took the Weber Road exit. He went east on Boughton. He arrived at St. Agnes Children's Hospital in 21 minutes. Claire stood in the receiving bay and looked at Marcus Webb. She had been to Boston and Denver and Santa Fe. She had heard a different kind of mind, and he was right about the flaw from people who had been in the room and were still living with having been in the room. She had carried a name in her bag for 2 days without knowing where she had seen it before. Marcus Webb, she said. It was not a question. He held her gaze. Yes. You wrote the patch. He said nothing, which was itself an answer. She looked at his hands restrained behind him, at the work uniform, at the complete and undefended calm of his face. Release him, she said. Miss Donovan, the device in his locker. Release him, now. The screen on the receiving bay wall showed a new alert from the St. Agnes liaison. Blood transfer arrived. 3 children in surgery stable. I need you to come upstairs, Claire said to Marcus. There are things I have to tell you and things I need to ask you, and I think we are running out of time for both. He looked at the alert. He looked at the door. My daughter came here tonight, he said. She is 9 years old. We will bring her here. She will be in the building with you. You have my word. Something shifted in his face, barely perceptible. The way a small adjustment in a large structure can change the load distribution entirely. All right, he said. They went upstairs. The 42nd floor was quieter at this hour than Claire had ever heard it. Lily arrived 20 minutes after Marcus, escorted by a security officer who had gone to Mrs. Carver's apartment. She walked into the conference room without knocking, assessed the situation with Dina's dark, direct eyes, and said, Are you in trouble? Some, Marcus said. Okay, she said, and sat down beside him, which apparently settled the matter. Claire asked Lily if she would rest on the couch in the next room. The conference room had glass walls. They could see her from where they sat. Claire placed the documents on the table between them. The objection report. The committee response. Her father's signature. She did not explain. She let him read. You knew my father reviewed this, she said. I knew the committee reviewed it, Marcus said. I did not know specifically who signed the response until you put it on the table. He paused. It does not change what happened. The decision was institutional. One man's name at the bottom does not mean one man is responsible for everything that followed. You are being more generous about this than you have any reason to be. I am being accurate, he said. Generosity has nothing to do with it. You built the system this company runs on. You were erased from the record, and you came back and took a job cleaning the floors of the building that runs the system. She stopped. Why? Because someone needed to watch it, he said. The flaw was never fully corrected. No one else who was still in a position to act knew that. Because the documentation had been cleaned, I could not get back into the industry. I could not publish what I knew without being dismissed. So I found a way to stay close, and I watched it, and when it started to fail in the way I always knew it would, I fixed what I could fix. The real fix requires the archive, Claire said. A complete offline record. Original build documentation. The objection report, the certification timeline, every change log since deployment, all time-stamped and verified. It will establish that the system was knowingly deployed with a critical flaw. It will also establish that the device in my locker was placed there after the attack began. He met her eyes. Opening it will establish all of that. It will also destroy the public record of how this company was built. I know, she said. If I do this, I am putting Lily's future in the hands of investigators and courts, while I wait to find out whether honesty is enough to protect us. I cannot guarantee that it is. Claire looked at the documents between them. She thought about the question she had been carrying for 2 years. Would any of this exist without his name on the door? She understood now that she had been asking the wrong question. The right question was, what are you willing to do now that you know what his name was on? She picked up the legal authorization form and wrote Marcus Webb's name on the line. She signed it. She slid it across the table. "I am authorizing your access. Every decision made in this room tonight is mine. If there are legal consequences for what you have done and what you are about to do, I will not allow the company to pursue them. I am putting that on record in writing." She paused. "In exchange, I need you to open the archive, all of it. We fix the system tonight, and we give everything else to the federal investigators in the morning." Marcus looked at the authorization form. He read it the way he read everything fully, without rushing, as though each word was load-bearing. "There is one more thing," Claire said. "Derek Hale disabled the backup channels. His name is in the Beacon Committee correspondence. He was junior counsel at the time. He has known from the beginning." Marcus looked up. "He has known from the beginning." She stood up. "Then let's finish this." They worked through the night. Marcus did not attempt to restore the full network simultaneously. Instead, he partitioned it, divided it into 12 independent operational zones that could function without communicating with each other, each drawing on its own local routing logic, rather than the compromised central architecture. It was not elegant, but it would hold, and holding safely was what the next 12 hours required. He prioritized St. Agnes and the 4 other children's hospitals in the network. He prioritized the regional blood banks and the high-volume trauma centers. He let the non-critical pharmaceutical routes go dark and accepted that some contracts would flag penalties in the morning. Claire watched him work. She brought him coffee at 2 in the morning. He thanked her without looking up. At 3:47, the last partitioned zone came online. Greg Paulson looked up from his laptop. "We're holding all critical routes active. No anomalies." No one cheered. The room simply exhaled. Claire found Derek Hale in his office at 7:15. She placed the folder in front of him, the acquisition term sheet, the communications log showing he had disabled the backup channels from his executive access point, and 3 pages of correspondence from Marcus's archive in which a much younger Derek Hale had confirmed, in writing, that the safety objection would not delay the project timeline. He looked at the folder. He did not open it. "You have been inside this company for a long time," Claire said. "You knew what my father decided. You helped him decide it. And when the opportunity came to profit from the consequences of that decision, you took it." He was quiet for a long time. "Your father was not a bad man," he said finally. "He made a calculation that most men in his position would have made. Probable harm versus certain delay versus the company's survival." "I know," Claire said. "I have read his signature. The acquisition was—" "Stop," she said, not harshly. "Just clearly. I am not interested in the frame you have built around it. I am interested in the fact that you disabled the backup channels in a system that routes blood to hospitals, knowing the primary system was under attack, because you needed the damage to reach a threshold that would force a sale. People could have died last night because you made that decision." She stood up. "I am forwarding everything in this folder to the federal investigation. I am recommending to the board that you be suspended this morning. I wanted to tell you myself because you worked with my father for a decade, and I think he would have wanted me to look you in the eye. I'm sorry it came to this," she said, and she meant it. It was possible to be genuinely sorry about an ending and still be entirely certain the ending was right. She walked out. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. By the time it was over, Derek Hale had been formally suspended, the federal investigation referral submitted, and the Meridian Capital acquisition rejected 7-3. Claire lost her position as board chair, and the Donovan family's controlling voting stake was placed in a supervised trust. She did not contest any of it. That night, after the network had been stable for 18 hours, Marcus found Lily asleep in a chair off the main lobby with her backpack still on her back. He sat down beside her. She stirred and opened her eyes. "Is it over?" she asked. "Most of it," he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her and thought about Dina not as a weight, not as an absence, but as a person who had known him through all of it and had been proud of him anyway. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." In the weeks that followed, federal investigators confirmed that the hard drive in Marcus Webb's locker had been placed there after the attack began, using credentials tied to a Meridian Capital contractor. The criminal allegation against Marcus was formally closed. The question of his unauthorized system access existed in a legal space the investigators ultimately declined to pursue, given the full context. The Beacon archive was entered into the public record in January. The Beacon platform's full technical history, the original flaw, the falsified certification, the subsequent updates that had managed but never resolved the root cause was documented and published. Marcus Webb was appointed Director of Systems Integrity at Etherian Emergency Grid in February. The announcement was brief and factual. Claire had written it herself. It did not use the word hero. It said, "This appointment corrects an injustice that persisted for too long and reflects a commitment to ensuring that the people who understand our systems most deeply are in a position to protect them." On a Thursday morning in early March, Marcus drove Lily to school. It was cold but clear, the kind of winter morning beginning to remember what spring felt like, and Lily had found her good coat, the green one, with the brass buttons she had picked herself at the resale shop on Clark Street. "Dad," she said, as they turned onto her school's street. "Yeah, at your job. Do you like it?" Marcus thought about the morning meetings with the engineering team, the systematic review of the Beacon architecture he had been given full access to for the first time in 11 years, the incremental work of fixing not just the symptoms, but the causes. What it felt like to sit at a table in a room where people knew his name and expected him to speak. "Yeah," he said. "I do." "Good," Lily said, with the finality of someone for whom this settled the matter entirely. He pulled up to the curb. She opened the door, then paused and looked back. "The picture of Mom," she said. "You moved it." "I put it on my desk," Marcus said. "At work, so I can see it." Lily looked at him with those dark, direct eyes. She would have liked that. She always said you worked too much, but she was proud of you. Marcus held very still. The morning light came through the windshield and lay across his hands on the steering wheel, and for a moment, he let himself sit inside that the light, the words, the fact of his daughter telling him something she had no way of knowing but somehow knew anyway. "I know," he said. Lily got out of the car. She waved once without looking back, the easy backward wave of a child who has no doubt you are watching, and walked through the school doors. Marcus sat at the curb for a moment. He thought about Dina not as a weight, not as an absence, not as the name in an incident report, but as a person. As someone who had said she was proud of him. As someone who had known him before the industry and after it and during all of it and had been proud of him anyway. He took a breath. He pulled away from the curb and drove toward downtown Chicago. He arrived at the Etherian building at 8:45. He entered through the main lobby entrance, the same glass doors that faced Michigan Avenue, the ones he had never used in 4 years of night shifts. The security desk attendant looked at his badge and said good morning. He said good morning back. The dispatch board mounted above the elevator bank showed the network status in real time, 641 hospitals, current routing active, all channels green. The elevators opened. Claire Donovan stepped out. She saw him immediately. She stopped. They had not spoken privately since the night in the conference room, had exchanged emails, attended the same meetings, passed in corridors, with the slightly formal courtesy of two people who have been through something significant together and have not yet fully negotiated what it means to exist in ordinary proximity after. There was no template for what they were to each other. There was no word for it. She looked at him. He looked at her. Then she stepped to the side and held the elevator door open. He walked past her and stepped in. He turned to face the lobby. She was still holding the door, looking at him with an expression that was not quite a smile, something quieter than a smile, something that acknowledged everything that had happened without requiring it to be said. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. She let the door close. The elevator rose. Behind her, through the lobby windows, Michigan Avenue was filling with the ordinary morning traffic of a city that did not know and did not need to know what had happened in this building 4 months ago. The ransomware, the patch, the 3 children at St. Agnes, the archive, the name that had been buried and was now on record. The dispatch board above the elevator bank showed all channels green. Every ambulance was going to the right place.